Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Unfeigned, the podcast. I'm Jay. I'm your host. And just want to start off by saying how much I appreciate y'all for listening, how much I appreciate y'all for tuning in. It's funny because I recorded so many episodes before. I mentioned this on episode one. I recorded so many episodes before, right? It was like over 100. And I explained on episode one a little bit about why I archived all those episodes. But it was never hard to record those episodes, right? And I think back and I wonder if it wasn't because if somewhere inside I knew that I wanted to release those episodes. Um but as I was recording them, I hadn't told anybody, right? So it hadn't been released yet, although I had a desire to release them. But it hadn't been released yet, so nobody knew. I think maybe my daughter knew, maybe my son, but nobody else knew that I even had a podcast, let alone recording that many episodes. And so it wasn't out there for everyone to hear. My life was not being exposed. I wasn't being exposed, right? So there wasn't a vulnerability factor in all those episodes that I recorded. And I think about this podcast now that I'm releasing, or that I've put this podcast out there, and it's scary. It's not scary like jump scare or something like that, but I'm definitely still nervous about it. I feel some kind of way. I don't really know how to explain it, but I feel some kind of way because I'm putting myself out there. Right? I've committed to myself. I've made a commitment to myself to be vulnerable and transparent and honest. And I've committed to making this podcast that, and that's scary. That's the thinking of the fact that people may be listening. I hope people listen. I hope I can encourage people and help someone. And I hope to learn from y'all, and I hope y'all will learn from my story. But it's scary, man. It's putting myself out there, complete transparency, complete vulnerability, complete honesty. I'm opening myself up for critique, and that's fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally fine with it. None of this is cause for concern or hesitation. I still believe in my vision for this podcast, but I'm just being open with y'all. It's scary. It's makes me feel some kind of way knowing that I can be judged, that I'm allowing myself to be judged by others. And it's funny, my whole life, I've said often that I don't really care about what people think. And I don't know that that's true. I don't know that anybody that says that actually means that or actually believes that. I think a more accurate statement is probably, I don't care what people say. I only care what the right people say. Or I only care what the right people think of me. Right? So in essence, I don't care what the wrong people think of me. And so it's not necessarily that all of a sudden now I care about what people think of me. That's neither here nor there. I think it's more of my issue with vulnerability, right, and transparency, and committing to being that is a scary thing when you're putting yourself in front of people, especially. I don't know everybody that's going to listen to this, and so some of y'all that are listening could be complete strangers, and I'm kind of exposing my story to y'all. So all that to say that even while it's scary and unknown, and I'm super excited, I'm like really hyped up about this podcast and being able to share my story. And I do want to say I have been blessed, man. I have been encouraged because some of y'all have reached out, right? And when I started this podcast, I don't do this with expectations. I didn't start this podcast hoping for something in return. That's not the point. I started this podcast because I want to share my story in hopes that someone can learn something from it. Someone can be encouraged by it. It might help somebody. And eventually I would love to have y'all on this podcast with me and we can share each other's stories and learn from each other and grow that way. But I never really expected, I hoped maybe, but I never really expected that people might reach out and tell me that how it encouraged them or whatever. And I've been blessed, man. Like this last week, I've heard from y'all. Some of y'all have reached out and said how, shared how it's encouraged you or, when you were listening to it and shared, some of y'all shared a bit, like a little piece of your story. And man, I'm encouraged. And this is awesome. I love it. Yeah, I prayed for this podcast. I did. I really did. I prayed for this podcast that in some way, shape, or form, not like beyond what I could expect, but in some way, shape, or form, that God would use this podcast to even encourage one person. And so it has been super encouraging this past week just to hear from y'all. So thank y'all. I appreciate y'all so much. So I want to dive in. Like I said, I don't want these episodes to be super long. I want to make it possible for y'all to listen like on a walk or while you're driving or while you have some time. I know I value your time. I know it's important. And so I don't want to waste it. I don't want to take up all your time. I know y'all got things to do and life happens to all of us. So I want to keep them relatively short. Some may get long. And I guess it's just the nature of doing a podcast where you're raw and unedited. And so that's a good segue into this episode. Unfeigned the podcast is going to be raw. It's going to be unedited. It's going to be unscripted. Now, that doesn't mean that I'll never edit it. And what I mean by edit, I'll add music here and there, or maybe clips of something. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to go back and make it and try to make it sound perfect. I'm not perfect. Life sucks sometimes. A lot, right? Sometimes it's really good. There's a lot to celebrate and a lot to be excited for, but sometimes life just sucks, man, and it's painful and it hurts. And I don't want to portray my life, especially this podcast, I don't want to portray myself as anything but real. So when I say unedited, there's not a whole lot of going back and clipping and all these kinds of things. So depending on how each episode goes, some may be longer than others. All that to say, thank you for going along with me on this journey. I'd love to hear from you. Reach out. I know I put my phone number on the first episode. I think it's in the description too. So reach out that way. Text me. Again, before I get started, share this with everybody you know. Follow this podcast on Spotify. That would be awesome, man. All right. So for this episode, I want to share like an overarching theme of my life, right? Let me preface it by saying, in the trailer for this podcast, I mentioned that I've been on a journey of healing and redemption and restoration and growth and maturity. Just the other day, I was talking with someone, a friend of mine, and I was telling them that it kind of hit me that this journey, my healing journey, right, my quote unquote rewritten story, in my journey of restoration and growth and maturity, it's been a 9-year journey. It's been a 9-year restoration. Right. And so I started to think about that, and it just put it into perspective of the kind of journey that I've been on to get to today, where I'm at today as I record this podcast. It's been a 9-year journey. And that's crazy. And so I'm hoping that this podcast, that's the point of this podcast, is to unpack those 9 years. Now, don't get nervous. I'm not going to be talking about all 9 years on this episode. But I just wanted to give you a bit of perspective of the adventure. Sometimes it feels like that, the journey that I've been on over the last 9 years. This overarching theme that I mentioned is sort of a motto. I don't know if it's something that you live by. I guess it kind of is. It's more of a a meaning of life, maybe. Maybe just a explanation. Uh, Here it is. I say this often. I've said this to my kids. I say this to many people. I try to live by this, even though I just said I don't know if it's something you live by. I try to follow this, or uh, what's the word I'm looking for? I try to go back to this in my own life. So here it is. And I've been saying this for a long time, and there are different versions of this probably out there. Obviously there is, but I've been saying it this way for a long time. I want you to pay close attention because we're about to unpack some of this throughout my story. Whatever you put your attention to, you will become attracted to. Whatever you become attracted to, you will pursue. Let me say that again. Listen in. Whatever you give your attention to, you will become attracted to. Whatever you become attracted to, you will pursue. Okay, so that little saying, I came up with that a long time ago. That is true for, if not every part of life, most parts of life. I would venture to say that it probably creeps into every single aspect of life. Whatever you give your attention to, you will pursue. You will become attracted to. Whatever you become attracted to, you will pursue. So, I'll give you a quick backstory. I know I mentioned a little bit on episode 1, but my behavior, my life was filled with choices and decisions and actions that were not good, right? And brought a lot of that into my marriage. And there was this constant battle within me, right? Because I wanted to be a new person and I was trying to hold on to the old me, right? And so a lot of those decisions, a lot of those actions, a lot of those choices that I made were because of what I put my attention to. And so I'm going to name a few things. I'm just going to talk about a few things openly. This may seem sort of all over the place. I'm going to think out loud here a little bit, but it'll all come together. So just kind of buckle in, bear with me. One of the things that, well, let me say this. I used to believe that if I could clean up my life, if I could get rid of the things that hold me back, or get rid of the things that cause me to do bad things or to do wrong things, or if I could just get rid of those things, of the things that quote unquote caused me to be the way I am, then I'd be good. Right? If those things were not in my life, I'd be good, right? I used to believe that. And on one hand, that's true. You know, in some regard, that is true. Right? There are things in our lives that we do or we have or we base our behaviors on that aren't good. And if we get rid of those things, we get rid of those, those things in our life, obviously that will affect change. But I used to believe that that was the thing, that was the cause, that was the root issue, right? And what I learned over time, obviously, what I learned was the things what I was praying that God would remove from my life, what I was trying so hard to just not do anymore, what I was trying so relentlessly to be better at, wasn't even the thing that was the cause of why I was the way I was. So for instance, pornography. All right, it's as a side note, I don't understand why everyone is so afraid to talk about this. I know that there are people and churches and groups that are not afraid to talk about it. But I would say that the majority walk on it like it's thin ice, right? Like you got to be super careful. I think that's a problem. That's just a side note. But pornography is a serious issue. We're not going to get into the whole, my view on the world and politics and all that stuff. But I will say this. We are bombarded. Young people, teenagers, young adults, elderly, whatever, male, female, doesn't matter. We are bombarded with sexuality. And the world sexualizes everything. And we can unpack that maybe some other time, but our world, our culture is driven by sex and money, right? And it's a shame because, and I'm trying not to go down a rabbit hole here, but it's a shame because our young girls form an identity, right? They form this perspective of who they are based on the sexualization that the world bombards them with. And that's such a shame. And it's so hard to combat too, because it's everywhere and in everything, right? So pornography is huge. It's a huge issue and it's everywhere, right? And nobody's exempt from it, no matter what you think or what you believe about yourself. Nobody's exempt from sin, right? There are obviously people that don't struggle with that or have an issue with that or are tempted by that or whatever, but nobody is exempt. And so pornography was something that I was exposed to at a young age. And again, on this podcast, we may not get into all the details, but it was at a very young age that I was exposed to my first visual of pornography. And so, and back when I was younger, it was either VHS tapes or magazines, right? So we didn't have the internet when I was that young, which is another crazy thing. The accessibility of everything sexual, anything, the accessibility of perversion that is available to everyone now it's mind-blowing. So when I was really young, I was exposed to pornography for the first time. And especially when you're young, I think your brain, it's affected differently, right? Obviously, it's growing, it's maturing, it's developing. You're figuring out life, who you are, your body, your sexuality, all this kind of stuff. And then you're introduced to a perversion of what's supposed to be pure and whole, right? So sex and the opposite sex, right? So for me, females. So sex, females, my own sexuality, what's right and wrong, all this kind of stuff, which is supposed to be pure and whole, and there's a design for it, and there's a specific purpose for it. Now all of a sudden, you are faced with a perversion of it. There's a perverted perspective of it, and by nature, our sinful nature, it's enticing, right? And so when you're exposed to pictures or videos or graphic images like that at such a young age, you're enticed. It's unknown, and there's this perversion inside of us already based on sin. There's this perversion inside of us where we become tempted by it. And I'm going to go back to my little saying. So whatever you put your attention to, you're going to become attracted to. So I started to put my attention to that. I started to put my attention to sexuality. And not just sexuality, but in the way that I saw it. Right? So, I mean, for example, when I was younger, I would fantasize about mannequins in the department stores. Right? And there is an innate curiosity within children. There's an innate curiosity within adolescents, and that's normal. It's in us. And then there's the perversion of it. And that's what I was putting my attention to. I didn't look at mannequins and say, "Oh, boobies," right? I think I was coming up with scenes in my head based on what I was exposed to, and these mannequins were the object of the perverted scenes in my head. And so I continued to put my attention to those kinds of things, right? And whatever you put your attention to, you're going to become attracted to. So what was happening was I wanted to see more of it because I put so much of my attention to it. The next step is attraction. I started to become attracted to it. And so I needed it, right? I needed to see it. I wanted to be around it. I wanted more of it. And again, maybe we get into the details in another episode, but after putting so much attention towards it and becoming attracted to it, I started to seek it out. And that's the pursuance of it, right? So whatever you put your attention to, you will become attracted to. Whatever you become attracted to, you will pursue. So I put my attention to it. I became attracted to it. Now I started to pursue it. And that started a very destructive journey of a very perverted world of sexuality. So and years, right? And so it affected how I saw women. It affected how I saw myself. At that time, I didn't have a relationship with Jesus, and I didn't really, I knew who God was. I went to church here and there with my sister's family, and I couldn't tell you anything about it. And I know I'm going off on some rabbit trails here, but I know one time I was younger and we went to this church and they handed out tracts, and the track was one where a guy was like, I think he was up in heaven, and he was sitting in like what looked like a movie theater, and apparently what was going to be played on the movie screen was his life, scenes of his life, right? And so it was basically, the track was basically, the purpose was to scare you enough that you accept Jesus because you don't want to go to hell. So that was kind of my idea of Jesus, God, heaven, hell, salvation, all that kind of stuff at that age, right? And so, but it all of this affected my perspective of sexuality, right? But I started to pursue that, right? And so now you fast forward a bit, and I'm married, and I had never dealt with that part of my life. I had never confronted my issue with pornography and my perverted view of sexuality. I never confronted that. So I bring that into my marriage. And it obviously affected my marriage. It obviously affected my behavior and my choices and my decisions. And so back to the original start of this podcast, the whole point was that I thought it was pornography. I thought that pornography was the issue, right? And as long as I could stop, then I'd be good. As long as I could quit looking at pornography, as long as I could quit fantasizing in that way, my marriage would be good. My peace would be good. My relationships would be good. Me being a father would be good. Like, life would just be good, right? Because I'd be cutting out the disease in my life. And I thought that for a long time. And there were, so I was married for 20 years, or almost 20 years. Well, there were long periods sometimes where there was nothing, right? And then there was a point where there was, like, literally, I just kind of stopped, right? And I thought I was good. The crazy thing was, even in the moments where I stopped, right? Even in the moment where I thought I was done with all that, there was still that same perversion inside me. And it wasn't really pornography, right? Now, I'm not saying that pornography is not to blame. What I'm saying is that's not what the root cause. That's not what fueled my decisions, my actions. And unfortunately, because of, and I'm going to get into this, but because of what I believe is the root issue, unfortunately, I was exposed to something that fed that. And unfortunately, it was pornography, which, has so many far-reaching, the tentacles are everywhere, of the destruction that it causes. But that was the tool that fueled this. Well, so I thought that as long as I was good, that I was good. And I also want to break off here and just say something. That mindset truly, truly, truly affected my view of God, my perspective of God, and my view of my relationship with God, right? And so I thought, if I'm good, God's good with me. But if I'm not, if I quote unquote mess up, God's going to punish me, right? And it all kind of ties together with this whole pornography thing. I thought, man, if I could just stop. So I'll just stop. I'll just try really hard not to do it. And then I'll be good. That'll be good. You know what? I'll love my wife more. Because surely that has to be the reason that my marriage has issues. Surely the pornography thing has to be the obstacle to a loving marriage. Maybe aspects of my personality would be different, because surely the pornography is ruining my life. Or even when I wasn't looking at pornography or anything, just the perverted view of sexuality and women and was still there. It didn't go away. Surely if I could just get rid of the pornography, all of this would go away and it would get better. And that's what I believed. And that could not be further from the truth. And so what I gave my attention to, I became attracted to. What I became attracted to, I pursued. And the thing that I pursued was something with being raw and unedited. This podcast is, so my daughter called, and I've just committed to myself that I will answer her phone call. I'll answer my kids' phone calls when they need me. And so anyway, had to pause this recording and go answer the phone call. I'm back. But the whole point is, what I gave my attention to, I became attracted to. When I became attracted to it, I started to pursue it. And let's fast forward even a little more. So many of my decisions, my behaviors and actions are what caused the destruction of my marriage. And you could argue either way. You could argue for both sides, but you could even argue that had I not had that issue in my life, that maybe my wife would have been different, or you can argue either way. But all I'm saying is, for me, it was legit. The way that I felt about this, what I'm about to share, it was legit for me. And yes, regardless of what may have or may not have caused this, it was still legit. It was still there. And so I felt like I wasn't, let's see. Well, I'm just going to say it. And I felt like the thing that I was actually pursuing, now I'm going to clarify because I don't want y'all to misread what I'm about to say. The thing that I was actually pursuing, right? What I was truly pursuing, not the pornography, but what I was truly pursuing was absent in my marriage. I wasn't getting it from my wife. And here's what I'm going to clarify. I'm not talking about sex. Okay, I'm not talking about sexual anything. And that's a good segue into this. What I used to believe was the pornography. What I used to believe was the root issue of all of my quote unquote issues, the issues in my marriage and why I was the way I was not it at all. What I believe the root cause truly was my need, my desperate need to be affirmed. Right? My desperate need for these applause. Right? My desperate need, this insatiable desire to be quote unquote the man. And I'll get into this in another episode, but I know that stems from when I was really young and years of having to, or feeling like I had to be the best, no matter where the pressures of that came from, feeling like I had to be the man always. And when I wasn't the man, or when I wasn't the best, how I was made to feel, how things changed in my relationships when I wasn't the man, or when I wasn't the best, or how I was made to feel about that. Right. And so, just like on episode 1, when I said, about the poem that I wrote for that woman or that girl, you make a vow to yourself to never feel that. So maybe subconsciously, even I made this vow that I would never feel that again. Right. I didn't want to feel like I wasn't the man, or that I wasn't good enough. Right. That's really what it comes down to. So I had this insatiable desire and this insatiable need to be good enough. And so my actions, my behaviors, my choices, and again, don't get me wrong, this perspective is perverted, right? It's perverted because I'm not seeking to be good enough. I'm not seeking my identity. I'm not seeking my worth. I'm not seeking my affirmation in the right spot, right? I'm not seeking that in the right place, which we'll get into another episode, which I believe, my identity is in Christ, but I'm not seeking this from the correct place, right? So it's all perverted. So I feel in this time, I feel like I'm not getting that from my marriage. And in my perverted perspective, I was giving my attention to something that gave me that false sense of feeling. I gave my attention to the thing that I thought I could control, that would make me feel like I'm the man. And when I gave enough attention to it, I became attracted to it. So I'm attracted to this thing that made me give me this false sense of being the man and worthy and good enough, and gave me this false sense of the applause and the standing ovation. And then when I became attracted to it, I started to pursue it. And it became like living in two different worlds. It became like living in a fantasy world, right? I had reality where I felt inadequate, not worthy. And I had this fantasy world that I lived in where I felt like I was the man and I was good enough, worthy. And it was all fake because it was things that were not real, that I felt like I could control to make me feel that way. And unfortunately, the thing I used was sexuality, pornography. It gave me this false sense of control, it gave me this false sense of being the man, this false sense of worthiness, being adequate, good enough. And so my choices and behaviors were bent towards that, towards feeling like the man. Whatever gave me that feeling, I put my attention to, which, as you know, you do that, then you become attracted to it, then you start to pursue it. And that ultimately led to the destruction of my marriage. And so in the beginning of this podcast, let me say this. Well, in the beginning of this podcast, I mentioned that it's been a 9-year journey, a 9-year restoration process, right? And I'm going to get into this probably on the next episode, but there was something happened in 2016. Okay, and I'm going to get into it on the next episode. Something happened in 2016. It was like the culmination of all this fantasy world that I was trying to live in. And so in 2016, something happened, and which is why I say it's been a almost 9-year journey of healing. But this overarching theme of whatever you put your attention to, you will become attracted to, and whatever you become attracted to, you will pursue. That was a driving force behind what led up to all that. And so over the last 9 years, it has been healing, and it's been a very rough journey. And so that gives you a little bit of glimpse into what I want to get into on the next podcast. And I know these first couple podcasts are a lot of history, a lot of flashbacks, maybe. So like you're watching a movie and all of a sudden they flash back, and so it might seem like that, and it may seem like that on the next couple episodes. But I want to give some history. I want to clarify some things so that when we get into unpacking, especially the last 2 years, which have been extremely pivotal, and that's really what I want to be the main focus. But I feel like a backstory will help people understand the whys and the hows and things like that. So in the beginning of this podcast, I said I didn't want it to be too long. I know I'm probably going on about 30 minutes. So I am so appreciative that y'all are with me on this journey, that you're hanging in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this with people. Again, follow this podcast on Spotify. I'm working to get it on all the other places that you get your podcasts. My phone number was on the first one. It's in the description of the first episode. Definitely reach out to me. I want to hear how this podcast might be encouraging you, or questions you have, or your story. Maybe we can even get on this podcast together and share some things if you'd be open to that. So I apologize again if this seemed a little bit like thinking out loud, but again, it's raw, unedited. I want to be real. I want to give you a glimpse into my story and how I got to where I am. And so the backstory is important, and some of these key indicators, these key things are crucial to understanding. So again, thank y'all for listening. I appreciate y'all so much. And until next time, I will see you then.